Yes, good morning.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Yes, good morning.
Right, great. Nice to see you guys on a weekday. Okay. About myself, I'm Vishnath. Um, I've been in the industry for last 20 years, and 15 years I've worked, and then I moved on into freelancing with complete training. So uh, that's about me. So quickly today we'll try to understand the overall agenda, which I can see is um, to make sure you guys understand what is DevOps, right? And uh, we'll go through kind of an introduction to AWS DevOps. We'll try to understand the core components of the AWS DevOps. Overall DevOps also we'll try to understand. And then we'll do a demo, a quick demo uh, of how a CI/CD pipeline works and how do you implement the AWS CI/CD pipeline. And then we will talk about the best practices for uh, DevOps security, and then we'll take up the questions before we close. I hope the agenda is fine with everyone.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes, yes.
So we'll see how far we can go, and yeah, we'll take up the questions in the end. So if you have any questions, please make a note of it so that at the end of it we can pick it up. Right? We'll go with the flow for now. Right, thank you. I request everyone to mute yourself and yeah, thank you. Right. So what is DevOps? Right. So well, when we talk about DevOps, we should also try to understand the SDLC, which is the software development lifecycle. Now, why do we say that DevOps and software development lifecycle goes next to each other? Because SDLC uh, was the primary focus to introduce DevOps. So DevOps was introduced to help the cycle move forward in a much efficient manner. Okay, DevOps on its own doesn't have any objective. Please remember, DevOps on its own doesn't have its own objective um, until unless it has been used on something, and that something is nothing but your software development lifecycle. So where exactly the DevOps starts, right? Taking a requirement, doing a design, and doing the development, right? Starting from the development cycle, testing, deployment, operations, and a bit of a planning. This bottom portion, you will see DevOps. Okay. Starting from software development, testing, deployment, and operation, and a bit on the planning, right? That's your DevOps. So why that evolution of DevOps has come into picture, right? Let's quickly see that before we get into what are the services in AWS which can handle it, right? So there used to be monolithic architecture. With this monolithic architecture, we used to have a lot of issues. Okay? Now, when I say a lot of issues, uh, the major issue is the time taken to be done, right? Uh, Guys, I request everyone to mute yourself. There's a bit of a background noise. Thank you. So the application used to be fantastic, all right? It used to be so perfect and neat and nice and clean. But then the time taken to develop this application used to take a very long time, right? So that's how the monolithic application works. So when the application is ready, it goes through build, test, and release. Build is nothing but when you convert a code into an executable format, right? For example, on Windows, you always use exe files, right? So these exe files are an executable file. But when you right click and edit that file, you will not find a code because that's written on some other language and converted into a exe file, which is a package or an executable file, right? Now that's your build. Then comes your test. You have to test the package so that it works as required and then deploy it. Deploying is you will or release. Release or deployment is a very close term, but it's not the same. Deployment could happen on a test server, development server, UAT server, or it could also happen on production. But when it happens on a production, we have a new terminology called as release. You need to understand that, right? Now, this is how the monolithical deployment used to happen. But now, what really happened is we got agile into picture, right? The reason agile was introduced to make sure the development cycle becomes much better, right? With the help of agile, the big monolithical application was broken down into multiple services. I repeat, big monolithical application was broken down into multiple app services called as microservices. Fantastic. Great advantage. What is the advantage? Now the developers have to just focus on their service. They don't have to be bothered about the other service. This way, now the application can be built 6 times faster because there are 6 separate sets. One developer doesn't have to wait for the other developer, and there are 6 different teams who are working parallelly. Initially, it used to be sequential. Now it is parallel. Fantastic. Now we solved the development speed issue, but we still got into another issue. How do you deploy this? Now every service will have its own build, test, and release. Now because of this microservice architecture, your delivery pipelines started becoming complicated, right? And that is where this is the area where the DevOps tools helps us a lot, right? So first, I'm just trying to generically map the DevOps, and then we will map it to the AWS cloud, right? So what is DevOps? DevOps is basically developer plus IT ops. I repeat, DevOps is developer plus IT ops. So what is the problem, which is which the DevOps is trying to solve? Communication, collaboration, and integration, right? CCI, right? So with the help of DevOps, what really happened? Let's try to understand. What are the gaps? When a developer is developing something, right? They only look at the code. Sorry, please go on mute kindly. Right. When the developer is developing something, okay, they only focus on one thing, right? Which is development. They are not bothered about um, uh, how the end system looks like, not much concerned about the infrastructural requirement or the code changes which is required for the development or the production, right? Their only focus is development systems and their turnaround is very fast. This is developers' point. You tell them a feature to develop, they'll just develop and leave it, right? They're not much worried about it. Now, the infrastructure view or the operational guy's view is, hey, I can't deploy it unless it is tested properly. Have you tested it on pre-prod? Have you made sure all the code goes through what production requires? Have you gone through everything there, right? All those things should be taken care. Okay, they have a very less turnaround time. Okay, they take a longer time for any feature to deploy because they are concerned about the production system. Now, this is a very big gap. Now, what did DevOps do? First of all, Agile closed the gap between the business and the development. Instead of giving a monolithical application, we divided that into microservice architecture. So Agile process fixed the issues between the business and the development team, right? We saw that. Now, between the development team and operations team, DevOps tools fixed it up, saying they now constantly work together. Developers, your operations team, everybody works together, right, to deploy anything anymore. Now, with that, what happens is the developer who's developing a code, they will keep the production system in mind. They'll say, okay, the production system has all these security features. I should make sure it is complied to that. And they are going to build the code based on that instead of running for it at the last minute. The whole working culture changed with the help of DevOps tools introduction because it put a lot of things in place, right? That's the whole idea behind the DevOps. So DevOps is not a tool. Please understand that. DevOps is not a tool. It is a methodology, right? Just trying to see if my headset is working. Fine. This. Right. So DevOps is a methodology. Now, developers work with operations to understand the impact of the code. Operations knows very clearly that what they need for infra, whether it is dev, prod, pre-prod, test UAT. Since they all are working together, any deployment is done on the production, it is feedback to the developers immediately to do the changes required to make sure they adjust to what is required. Three top challenges which has been met is one is the release management. Okay, what is release management? Now, with the help of release management, you are able to handle the risks, dependencies, and compliance issue in a much better way. Okay, release deployment coordination. Now, release management is something different. When the release is always mentioned to the production, deployment coordination is for any of the environment which you take. Okay, in any infrastructure deployment, you have two types of environment, multiple types of environment: dev, test, UAT, pre-prod, and prod. Okay. Now you have a faster way of accessing and understanding this of what is happening. Make sense? Okay. All right. So, and then the deployment automation. Now, since you automated, the code just moves from one place to the other without any thought process, right? When do you have to adopt? Only if it is an e-commerce website, okay, where you have continuous changes, or a cloud platform, you're supposed to adopt for DevOps. If it is a mission critical application like banks, power systems, we usually not tend to adopt for the DevOps because DevOps adds automation, and automation is not great for such mission critical applications. For those mission critical applications, even as of today, even though the DevOps is much matured, even as of today, we are talking many customers with bank and power systems, they just go manual way. They might have DevOps. It's a partial DevOps. They will do it manually, even though the configuration is done there, right? So let's quickly understand the life cycle. So we have 5 life cycles, 5 levels: continuous development, testing, integration, deployment, and monitor. Continuous development, we have 2 phases or 2 parts: plan and code. Planning is done with the help of tools like Jira, and the coding is done with the help of tools like uh, planning is done with the help of Jira, coding is done with the help of Git or GitHub. Then build is done with the help of Maven, Gradle. These are build tools. And then test is done with an Selenium or JUnit. These are tools. So as a DevOps engineer, Okay, just give me a sec. As a DevOps engineer, we are supposed to make sure you understand the integration of this, right? And you should know how and how it talks and all those things, right? It's very, very important. Yeah. Now, the left hand side is just for our understanding. Our work is very less when compared to the um, developers' work. Integration, which is the Jenkins. I'm just talking about general tools. I will also talk about the AWS tools in a while, in a few minutes. Now, Jenkins is the integration tool. Okay, that is the open source tool which we have. Right. Apart from that, we have the deploy, operate, and monitor. In the deploy, we basically have uh, the Chef, Puppet, Ansible, which is basically a configuration management tool. And we also have another important component called as the containerization world in the operate world, deploy and operate. And then in the monitoring, we have the Neuralink and the Nagios, some monitoring tool. This all put together. So on the right hand side, if you see, it is our responsibility overall to manage those tools, integrate those tools, deploy those tools, right? Right from the Jenkins, right? Right from the integration tools, right? Okay. Now, is that okay? So if I have to equate this to AWS, so here we have sorry. Okay. So here we have for the plan and code, we have the code commit. Okay. Then the integration tool is basically the AWS pipeline. Okay. The in the build phase, we have the code build, right? And then the deployment phase, we have the code deploy. And then monitoring, we have the CloudWatch. And overall, if at all we want to do any infrastructure deployment, okay, we have the CloudFormation template. So let me just quickly write this down so that you have a clear understanding of what is happening. So the first one, I'll go with the top one, which is uh, code commit, and then comes the uh, code build, and then the integration tool is going to be the code pipeline. The deployment tools are going to be code deploy, and also we have the containerization, and then finally the CloudWatch. Okay, this is in the same sequence of your life cycle. All right. So there are other container services which are there. I mean, there are other services like Lambda, right? It can integrate it to Lambda, which is basically a serverless function, right? And we do have containers, right? Which is your EKS and ECS. I repeat, it is EKS and ECS. Right? So these are the services in AWS which are available. Let me just quickly show you that portal, which will make sense. So we have the code commit on the AWS. Screen is visible. Yes, screen is visible. So we have the code commit where we can maintain the repository. Okay. And then we have basically there's one more component called as code artifact where, as I told you, right, after the code build, right, after the code build is nothing but it is going to do the building of it. After the code build, there is a place where you can store this build packages. Okay, and that location is basically the code artifact, right? And then we have the pipeline, and then the deploy. Okay, these are the DevOps tools, even though it says developer tools, basically these are the DevOps tools. That's why they have mentioned it as developer, because this is going to help developers more than anybody else. As I said, this tools doesn't have its own objective except helping the developer to move the code from one phase to the other automatically, right? Now, said that, what I want to do is I want to quickly show a demo before we proceed. Okay, so I'm going to create a repository, okay, and we will push a code into the repository. We'll try to build a code, do a build of it, right? Using the code build, and then we'll see how it goes. And then we'll also put that in the part of the pipeline. Okay, so I'm gonna build a repository, just giving a name, create a repository. Um, Hold on. Just 1 minute.
Hi Vishwa, a quick question. This is Nikesh.
Yeah.
Uh, the
Yes,
things
please.
that you are mentioning here is more of what I'm understanding right now till the to the time we have reached here is more of analyzing and adding the development cycle of it, right?
Yes.
So if I may ask, all of this comes after a BA role, is that right?
What is that BA role you're talking
A business analyst role. Like a
about?
developer will only work on things majorly when it comes from the analysis, apart from their own analysis, internal.
That is one input of it. Yes.
Okay, okay.
Right.
I'll hold on to my questions
Sure.
then.
Right. I mean, that's one input of it to the
Mhm.
developers, right? It's just not the input to the developers.
Okay.
Okay, I do have something here. They have expired the code commit. It's okay, we'll use something else. Um, Too much challenge. So we could use source realized. Um, fantastic. Okay, no problem. GitHub. See, GitHub is also a source code manager, right? So yeah, I'm gonna use a GitHub sample project here. to deploy it on the AWS. Um, Sorry for this silence. Slight here and there. Okay, let's create a tree. Repository name. All right, and I'm going to add a sample file. I'm going to create an index file. Extra HTML. This is our test web server, right? Now, before I can attach it to the AWS pipeline, I will have to before I can attach it here and build a project, I can create a project here. And you see the source, I can always say GitHub, right? So here, when I say public rep, I could make that as a public repository for my ease of this one. Okay. I could keep it as private, but I can also make it public, which is much more easier to handle, which is right now. So the only thing which I have to do is pass this URL and then do the build. Role name is build one. Uh, I'm just adding all the commands which I want here. Uh, so this builder is where it will build. So what is happening in the background is there is a machine which will get created in the background, right? And I can also put it saying that put it in a specific artifacts, right? It says no artifact. Remove this. Okay. Now you could put the output file. Say for example, whenever I do the build, right? It's a very simple index file. Whenever I do a build, okay, it is saying what you want to do on provision the model on demand, manage image by AWS code build, and it's an EC2 instance. You can also create a Lambda function. This is please understand, this is an interim machine on which all the build will happen. Okay, that is what we are selecting here. So we have selected the source as this sample code, and then you're gonna say, I don't need the GitHub credentials right now. That's because I'm selecting a public repository, and for a public repository, I don't need credentials, right? But you could authenticate it through the credentials, right? Manage default source credentials. And these are the standard operating system which is there. I mean, you can't change too much. You can only use these many options to build a virtual machine in the backend for the code build to build it and then push the artifact into somewhere like this, right? I'll say build one. So I'm going to push an artifact into my bucket, S3 bucket, right? And then say create a build project. Error, project one. So we have a repository. We are doing a build. And once the build happens, I will take that build and do a code deploy on a wherever I want to deploy, right? Now, created the project, start the build. It's a very simple dummy build. I just want you to understand what is happening, right? I could say I'm doing a build on the Python. I can do a build on whatever I like to do, right? So you see it is doing, it succeeded with the build. Faces found in YAML, error, npm error is there. Um, it's okay. That's because it didn't find, when you run npm install, it does need some files, which I haven't given, right? But assume this is the build. I don't want to get into code, or I want you to focus on how an AWS components are gonna do things, right? I could rather edit this code instead of install. I could just say uh, build was successful. Okay. I could also pass this as a file. Now I could copy this into the repository, the whole thing as the whole thing. I can copy it into a repository, and I can pass it as a file as well. Both works, right? So here what will happen is I just need to specify the build spec dot YAML spc. My spelling is very okay. So I'm going to create a file called as buildspec.yaml and put it here. It's all the same thing. I don't have to do any changes in my build code, right? So here, if you see, I have the build file mentioning that this is the buildspec.yaml, which is supposed to be taken, and it'll still work the same way, right? Let's update the project. You see how simple it is to do my testing of the code, right? If there was a Python code with me, I could have easily tested a Java code. It will create for Java. If you see, so for example, you pick up a Java, you can mention whatever Java commands you want to run. Now you might say, hey, Java is not installed on that backend machine. No, AWS will take care of it, right? It will provision a machine. It will install all the required components. You see, it is successful, right? It did not go through any errors. It did create whatever is required, and it also would have created an artifact, if I'm wrong. because we did say that, okay, it might have pushed it to the S3 bucket because we don't have an code artifact. It might have pushed it to the S3 bucket. So build phase was successful, blah, blah, blah. Where is that? Okay, this is the CloudWatch logs, right? This is what I was trying to say. If you see the fifth component or the life cycle of the DevOps, this is the CloudWatch logs. Every log is going to sit there. Whatever happens, it's not about the application logs. I'm talking about the logs coming through this build project, right? Now, I would also like to show you my artifact, which actually went through the S3 bucket. Let me see if something has been added there. So I did mention a file to be added. Not sure if that got added. Was that added? Just modify. Because there was no artifact output, so it did not add an empty artifact there because I did not tell it to create, do anything except the echo part of it, right? Fine. I could have also, I could have done is, instead of doing this, I could have said, push it to file1.txt. So it is creating a file. Now, since it is creating a file, it will try to put this into the artifact, right? Now let's try to build this again, project again. And let me just show you that artifact part of it. So right now what it is doing is that build is actually creating a file, and that file has to go into the artifacts. And basically it has to get into the S3 bucket, right? Because that's the output of that build. Okay, so whatever is the output of the build, it has to get into the S3 bucket somewhere. Did it? There's supposed to be a folder getting created here. Okay. Build details, artifact, build spec, YAML file, build logs. Let's check the logs once. Did it really do what is being told? It should have. I'm just looking for that line. Yeah. See that it did create this. Yeah, it's running inside a container. Hello world. And then it completed it. So this file is not exported part of the artifact yet. See, upload of artifact successful, but that file is not there. Yes, okay. But technically it should have come here. That is what we are trying to say. If not, at least it should, we could also create a separate artifact here and can say that I will put everything here and do it. Yeah, both the options are available, right? So next, this account. So this is an artifact. So in the code build, I can always say the project. I can always say put it in the artifacts. Even that is very much possible. So edit. I hope this is understandable of what we're trying to do. Artifacts. So here, still not showing that artifact which we just created. Yeah, maybe we are missing something. It's okay. But I just don't want to get into too details here. Objective is for you to understand the overall flow, what is happening. Now this Git repository, which I've been adding directly on the GUI. I can also do a pull of it and then do a push of it and then do it from the uh, command line, right? And then we can take up this build file, the artifact file. Assume there is an artifact file which is got created, right? This technically this file which is getting created, and I can then use a uh, code build, right, and deploy it. So let's do one thing. Let's try to create a pipeline, right, which might integrate everything together. Instead of me triggering it separately, when I do a change, which will automatically trigger, right? We'll try to fine tune that. Second. So you can also create it from the template. You want to say push to ECR, push to deploy to CloudFormation templates, and all those things you can do. Or I'm gonna say, yeah, these are predefined stuff. If at all you're doing some built-in stuff, I'm gonna say I will create it from custom build, right, from scratch. Right? So I'm gonna say pipeline one. Everything is charged. Remember, okay? Everything is charged. Always remember that. Okay. So execution mode is queued. There is a role which gets created. Now, what is a role? Role is basically an option where uh, uh, we are telling one AWS service to do some action on another AWS service, right? And that is what is role, right? Source. Now, this is where I will have to select GitHub. We saw that the GitHub link works perfectly fine. It was able to take up the GitHub uh, and talk to us, right? I'm gonna say uh, it is asking me to connect to the GitHub. Here. This is forcing me to connect to the GitHub, and I am gonna run. Lead this, and it should show that repository. Do it here only. Sorry guys, give me one. This username password is not some. Uh, seriously. I'm sorry, guys. Form. Now it will show up the repository. It should have. What is the repository name which we have? Sample scope. So this is already listed there. Use this, showing the branch. So in a repository, there is a branch where we could use a branch name, and branches are used to make sure that what is that? Your copy of the code is more consistent, right? Now the next thing is we are going to do a build. I'm saying source artifact is this. We're taking care of that. The build stage, the commands, specify the shell commands to run with your compute action in the code pipeline, or you can use the other build tool like the code build and say, I want to use this project which you have already created and single build. And I've already defined what has to be done in that. I have already defined that the file has to be build spec, and I'm using that code build which is there. I can also go and say, specify some environment variables. Now, environment variables is a very interesting and a deeper concept, but yes, you can pass on variables, and that is not a compulsory step. So I could also add a tester. So I'm skipping for now. I could add testers anywhere. Okay. Now comes the deployment part. Now, deployment part, I'm going to use code deploy, and I don't have an application name. So I will have to create code deploy quickly. Well, sure. Code deploy, I'm going to create a code deploy. As we created code build, I will have to create a code deploy. Okay. So create an application, F1, which is a platform. It's going to be EC2 instance. You can choose on which you want to deploy. I'm going to make it as EC2 instance. I do have an EC2 instance, so it's not a big deal for me to. So let me just go to EC2 instance. I think we have EC2 instance. Not really. Oh, okay. I just need to switch it on. Okay, let it come up. So I'm going to create a deployment group. This is where a code deploy will say where I want to deploy and what are the roles which I have to follow and stuff. Right? Here I will also have to create a role. I'm going to deploy on EC2 instance with name. Okay, so there is one unique match instance, and then don't want anything else. No load balancers. Service role is required. Now I'm going to use IAM role. You see how one by one we are creating. Now this is all a one-time deployment. Okay, don't worry about the success factor of it. I want you to understand only the flow of it. Okay, we are not into a deeper session. This is just a fundamental stuff of saying what goes in to create a pipeline and how efficient it is going to be, right? So I'm going to say EC2. So code deploy should be able to access EC2. So it says enter a service role with code deploy permission that grants access to the target instance. EC2 and permission policies. Role is gonna be code deploy, and policy code deploy role. Yeah, it's already there. EC2 instance. Yeah, it's already having all the permissions. Just need to create this code deploy one. So the role is always something on behalf of which, on behalf of us, is going to do the job. Okay. Um, okay. Oh, it needs the ARM name. I Okay. So the deployment group is created, and now finally create the deployment of information is stored GitHub. I can take it up from the S3 bucket. Why is it trying? So S3 bucket, we did store something. So I hope you understood the flow now, that where the S3 bucket, wherever data we are storing, we're picking up the data. So the build is going to throw the data into the S3 bucket. The code deploy is going to pick up the data from S3 bucket. Let's assume this is, it needs in this format. So this is the format. Okay. Revision file type. So it needs only a zip file. So let me search for a zip file. Okay, so it definitely needs one of the type, tar, zip, blah blah blah, and I don't have one, so I'm going to quickly upload. Might have a zip file. I'm just creating a zip file, send to compress. Adding a zip file. Go, and I'm taking the link of this zip file. It's going to deploy it. So this is create deployment. So it is going to deploy this file. You see, it is just created a deployment, but I mean, it is in progress where it is going to copy that file into that particular machine. Right? Now, part of the pipeline, I will have to go previous, next, code deployment, and the deployment. You see, I'm putting it part of the pipeline. I just did manually. Now I'm putting it part of the pipeline. See that? Then create a pipeline. This is how you create a pipeline. So if I trigger it, if I do any changes to my GitHub file, this pipeline will automatically, you see right now, it may go or it may not go. Just don't go on that. We may have to fine tune a lot of things. But I hope you understood the flow of how a pipeline can be built. If you know things, how easily a pipeline can be built as a one-time activity. And this is going to help you to keep things progressing. It is going to help the developers keep things progressing. I've done a very, very simple pipeline. We could complicate it as much as possible, as much as possible, right? Code deployment is the code deploy is basically to deploy it on the instance, right? And pipeline is going to stitch everything together. Yeah, there is some error. We will have to work on it. I mean, this is how it goes, right? So it says it doesn't understand what is happening here. So we will have to, I just took a very random thing, right? So we may have to start troubleshooting it as we go. Artifact is not found. Some permission issues are there. We'll have to sort that out. That's okay. I mean, I am not, I was not willing to show up. I mean, whole idea was I wanted to show you the flow, not exactly it may work, it may not work, because it depends on scenarios, permissions, and stuff. Am I clear? Right? I hope you guys understood what we are meaning to do section. Okay, what next? Now that we have understood the flow of it, right? I wanted you guys to understand what are the best practices which are there part of the DevOps, right? For security purpose. Okay. I want to talk a little bit on theory and before I open up things for the questions. So let's try to understand that part of it. Okay. So overall, what we are going to try to understand here is DevSecOps security. We'll also try to understand the key security risks in DevOps, and we'll also try to understand AWS security best practices for DevOps, tools and services, then a scenario probably, and then we'll open up to questions. So security as such, okay. Um, what do you mean by security? Why is security in the DevOps important? Now, if I don't put a security, which I have not shown in the pipeline, I just added a repository. I added some files inside that. Um, um, and then just yeah, I added some files, and then that files were given to the build to do some build, right? And then that build is gonna give an output artifact, and then it was given to the code deploy to deploy it on the EC2 instance, right? Now, in the whole flow, I haven't added any what do you say security part of it. You might think, hey, it's all homegrown code. Why do I need security there? Yes. Now, the security system is required around the DevOps because things could have happened in deliberate or non-deliberate. We don't know, right? For the safety of the production systems, for the safety of the production systems, we will have to go through certain security checks. And that is done with the help of the terminology which we use is your security practices into DevOps, and that is called as DevSecOps, right? Now, we could add security every layer, okay? You can deliver the code securely, okay? You can, first of all, the code which comes in through the Git, we will have to check whether it is a clean code. Is it following the company standards, right? And then you can then check whether um, after you build it, in the build, do we have any kind of testing, I mean, flaws in the code, in the application itself, whether in the front end, back end, how is the system behaving, and all those things. We will have to add security there also. Make sense? Okay. Right. And then we have the challenge. The major challenge when you apply the security is you should make sure you you really don't uh, uh, change the speed at which the application is working. Okay, that's a main important stuff which you really need to understand, right? Um, the key security risks in DevOps are major stuffs. Okay, hard-coded APIs. What is an hard-coded API keys? I'm sure you guys understand what is an API, right? API is something where a software component will go and talk to the other uh, software component, right? Sorry. So those keys should actually be uh, kept safe and not hard coded inside the code, which is a very wrong thing. Any hacker gets access to the code by mistake, right? They have access to the passwords, right? So how do you secure it? How can you even secure it? We can use tools for that, right? So misconfiguration of the resources like security group, IAM policy. um what happens is sometimes we end up doing a lot of bigger open um uh, we give a wide open range on the security, so anything anybody can access just for our ease, which is a wrong approach again, right? Insecure containers. Now what is a container? I'm sure you guys have heard about this buzzword called as containers. Containers are making our life very very simple, right? It is making sure that um, the application is bundled in a very nice way. It is using less resources, and it is making sure the it is much faster and reliable. But when you create a container, the image from where you're creating it is also an important thing which you need to handle, right? There could be vulnerable images, which is supposed to be handled in a very nice way, right? And then unsecured pipelines, okay, exposed pipelines. You have inadequate IAM role. Right now, if you see, we just created an IAM policy for a code deploy. Now, code deploy had a lot of things, right? It had auto scaling, it had load balancers, it has, but maybe I don't want all those things. Somebody has to go on mute. There's a bit of a background noise. Sorry about that. Uh, yes. Okay. So you should make sure things are safe. Okay, on the pipeline level also, you should make sure it's very very important that that pipeline. For example, you have built a pipeline, okay, and you have not taken care of the IAM policy properly, and then that pipeline is also accessible to somebody else. You're technically allowing others to just explore and expose unwanted stuff. Okay, sorry. Okay, insufficient logging. Uh, insufficient logging is something what we usually do is, say for example, now I was supposed to deploy it on an EC2 instance, right? Now, if the deployment is successful or not, the EC2 instance should say that, hey, boss, somebody tried to change some file and it was changed successfully. That log has to be recorded somewhere. Code deploy also should go and inform and keep that log, which is basically in the CloudWatch log, saying that I tried to deploy something on EC2 instance at this point of time and I deployed it. And this is the EC2 instance. Now, these kind of logs, when they are there on a larger picture, we can put all these logs into a churning machine. There are churning machines where it can correlate the logs and say, yes, easy to inform that it was successful at this time. Code deploy said that I deployed it, it's matching. So which means it was a genuine thing which happened, right? Now, if only EC2 is saying that, hey, something got changed, code deploy never said that I deployed anything, which means there was some other intruder unwantedly trying to do something else, right? Remember that always. These kind of logs are very, very important. So the best practices are identity management, do an encryption. Now, of course, encryption, you guys know day in, day out, you guys are seeing a lot. Um, Encryption is, in a simple terms, when you access your web browser, on the top you see a lock symbol saying HTTPS, it is secure. That's your encryption, right? Make sure all your things which you create, it's all encrypted, right? The storage which you're using, storage at rest which is there is all encrypted. S3 bucket which you use for artifacts is all encrypted, right? And then comes your infrastructure as a code. Sorry, throat is getting dried up, so just drinking water. So infrastructure as a code. Uh, Infrastructure as a code is a very, very, very important component in the whole system because right now, if you see, the EC2 instance was already created. You understand? The EC2 instance was already created. What if I want to create a EC2 instance automatically in the pipeline? You can use the tool for infrastructure as a code. Infrastructure as a code, IaaC or IAC means the same, right? And then you should also have a vulnerability management part of the pipeline, okay, where you make sure neither the code nor the packaged code and the application itself is vulnerable to anything. You should also try to manage the network security. Who can access this? Who all can access this? At what time? I mean, what range of IPs it can be accessed? What range of ports it can be accessed? Right? All those things comes under network security, and the pipeline security is who all have access to the pipeline. What pipeline can access? You don't give the whole world of access for your own ease, right? You'll have to have control over it. The tools we can talk about is in AWS. IAM is whatever I just showed you, where we created a role, we can create users, policies. AWS IAM does a fantastic job, right? And the depth of it, which it can handle things, is much, much, much better, right? So IAM roles are one of the most important features, and it helps you create a lot of connectivity between two services, right? Secrets manager, as I told you, the API keys issues where you will have to hold the keys somewhere very securely and make sure it is all secured. Secrets manager can just keep the store data. It can even rotate the credentials securely and pass that information securely to the pipeline when required. So the pipeline store the data, your build files, build spec files, your code itself doesn't have to store any passwords or API keys. The pipeline will fetch it for you. You just need to use it on the code and execute the code. Guard duty, it does threat detection and monitoring. So whenever there is an application deployed, it can immediately do a threat detection and monitor it and give you an alert saying that, hey, something has gone wrong. You'll have to look into it immediately. WAF is basically a web application firewall from common exploits, DDoS effects, all these things the WAF can take up on your web application which you deploy. AWS config is basically, um, I would say it is more of a configuration management compliance tool. It's a fantastic system where it'll keep monitoring the resources for the compliances. If you do any changes and if it doesn't fit the compliance of what you have predefined, which is also one of the security requirement, it'll raise it. And then inspect, which is again one more vulnerability management for EC2 and container images specifically, which does again vulnerability managements as we spoke about the vulnerability, right? And then we also have certain more workflows on the DevOps which you can look into it, like the shift left security. Make sure the life cycle of the in the life cycle of the development, you figure out the security issues as early as possible, right? Now that's the best practice, the workflows, right? Automate the code review, vulnerability scans and testing. The code reviews, as soon as you write the code has to go to the reviewer. The reviewer will just check it, approve it, scan for vulnerabilities with the help of Sonar Cube, and then get into the pipeline automatically. It's all automated. It should all be automated. You should have the continuous monitoring with CloudWatch, CloudTrail for real-time logs and monitoring. CloudTrail will take care of logs. CloudWatch will by default collect the metrics and secure containerization like the ECR, where you can keep the images, scan the images before the Docker images, right? So benefits, of course, you are going to have enhanced security, faster time to market, reduced cost for incidents. Major problem in the industry, the number of security incidents in a system or in an operations is very small, but the impact of the security incidents is very high. Number of non-security incidents are very high, but those impacts are very low. Always remember that. So you will have to make sure customers are okay to have non-security incidents, even 10,000. Okay, because it's not going to impact business. Impact is very, very low. It still keeps going on. Customers are not okay to have a single security incident, right? Remember that. And of course, compliance to regulatory. That's pretty much which I wanted to cover. I open up for questions. Go ahead. Questions, please. No questions? All good? You understood what is DevOps, what is DevSecOps, how the flow of AWS comes through, what are the components in AWS which compromises to DevOps tools. All good?
I have a question, Vishwa.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, do we need to create a separate pipeline for different projects? For example, if five
Recommended,
projects
yes.
are, so it's not a one-time job.
No, it is not a one-time job. I mean, see, you could say for the same for multiple projects, I will use the same pipeline. But then end of the day, you can't keep all the project work into a single repository. Yes or no?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, true.
So since your repository changes, I'm not saying you can't do it, but recommendations are please keep separate pipelines for separate projects. In fact, I have worked such a way that I was working for 3 projects at the same time, and each project had 15 to 18 microservices. For each microservices, they had separate pipelines because each microservices is an tiny application, and each application we had maintained a separate repository, separate pipeline, separate code build, artifacts, and deployment, because that gives you a better clarity of what is happening. It's okay. I mean, how does it matter? Because AWS is going to run it. It's not bothering you. Whether you combine it or keep it individual, the cost for you is going to be the same.
No, I mean, there is no way to automate it using ISC tool like Terraform or something.
You can. Absolutely. If you want to build a code pipeline using Terraform, you can definitely write the whole code in that and just deploy it off. Whenever a new pipeline comes, you have a template. Create a template,
Okay.
do some small changes to it, deploy it off. Perfectly fine. Good question, actually.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, Vishwa.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Shweta.
Yeah. So my question is now whenever I push my code to my main branch, it will be deployed. I mean, it will be pushed to the server, right? The
Now
production or
that
whatever.
depends. Yes, main branch usually has a trigger point, and then it will trigger the next actions to be taken, and effectively it should be deployed on the production. But you should not be pushing directly to the main. You know that, right? You'll have to push it to
Yeah,
the
that is what
branch, get
actually
it
my question
approved.
point.
Right.
So is there like any settings that like I want to based on some checks or based on some settings like I want to push on specific time or that way it should go like
So um,
hmm,
what we really need to do is see that is a branching strategy which you need to follow.
hmm.
When the code comes to main, the whole pipeline will trigger to the production.
Okay.
Okay. But when you work, you have to take a copy of it. Okay. And then
Hmm.
work on it, or do a clone into
Hmm.
the local machine, work on it,
Hmm.
push it back into the same what you have created as a branch, create a pull request, put an approver, reviewer, and so that they
Hmm.
both approve it, and then only they will merge it to the main. This way, the code in the main branch is always safe and secure.
Hmm.
Always
Okay,
remember
got
that.
it. Got it.
Never ever merge your code, which you just freshly developed, into the thing. Understand the factory setup. How is the factory coming? When you create a product, it has to go through some test phase before it can go to the shelf in the market, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
will
We do
not,
follow
you will
that.
collect. That has to be that way. A basic security check has to be done. So you can't merge the code directly into the main, because the main branch, when something is merged to the main branch, it understands that I have to trigger the production line, and it'll just trigger the production line, which is very dangerous stuff.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, generally we do create branch and do not push directly to main.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
got
And
it.
have a reviewer, even if it is a peer. If it is just your
Yeah,
peer,
yeah.
better do a review.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have seen,
Correct.
sorry to say, but I have seen people, even though they have good peer working as a team member, they feel little uncomfortable getting reviews. But trust me, it is a great practice, even if it is a peer, not a senior person, same level of yours. Get it review.
Yeah, yeah.
One more pair of eye is actually going to help you to be safer on a longer run.
Yes. Thank you.
Welcome.
I have this is my name is Magesh. I have a question.
Yeah, Mahesh.
So one thing I want to understand is scaling. For example, I have my services. I've built my services from the load point of view. I have to scale the deployment. Okay, that maybe the service too many users are accessing it. How
Okay.
can that be set up in the deployment? Is something which you have to look at manually, or cloud bots or cloud monitoring can be configured to
Now
do
that
that?
is a part, that is part of the planning. Okay. Now what you can do is, if at all you're using an EC2 instance, you can deploy a auto scaling group, and you can attach this auto scaling group to a code deploy. Okay. And
Hmm.
code deploy is so intelligent that, say for example, today you have around 3 machines, tomorrow you have 10 machines. Code deploy, since you have attached the auto scaling group itself, whatever you want to do or deploy, it will do it on that group. So you don't have to worry about the deployment part of it, right? So now the second option is container based. If you're using container based, I recommend everyone to use EKS, which is Kubernetes cluster. Yes, it is costly. I'm not denying the fact, but the feature and options which you can explore is mind blowing. Is just mind blowing. Just to
Yeah.
make understand everyone, that's why we have a actually upcoming weekend batch, a workshop kind of a thing which is coming up. So it's a Docker come Kubernetes, which is a 6 hour session. uh, I mean, this was based on a lot of demand. Everybody wanted to get into Docker and Kubernetes. It's just a part one of it where we focus more on the Docker, and then just a basic on Kubernetes, how it is, and then we have a part two. I mean, today the demand for that is so high that customers are blindly saying, don't use any other container service, use Kubernetes, whether AWS Kubernetes, Azure Kubernetes. People don't want to go on-prem Kubernetes also. This solves a lot of deployment problems, majorly deployment problems. It is so easy. Once you set it up, you don't have to worry about it. Deployment is a piece of cake there. And scaling is automatically taken care, which is answering both of your questions.
Yeah. So you're saying there are two options. One is EC2 level, at the level of
Absolutely.
EC2. That
If at
is
all
one.
your demand or usage is very high, very, very high, I will recommend just go with EC2. But if your usage of that application is moderate, go with the container based, which is Kubernetes based.
Okay. Okay.
Right? Right. Questions?
Vishwa, this is Nikesh again. I
Yeah,
folded
Nikesh.
my question.
Thank you.
So,
Go ahead.
so help me understand how DevOps can help a business analyst in terms of documenting, analyzing, and plus understanding where the things are.
See, code pipeline does have a limited number of options for the business analysis, at least on the AWS part. But if you talk about the Azure part, Azure has a lot of pipeline automation which you can do for the BI part of it. Now, apart from this, uh, if you okay, now if you what you want to automate, can you tell me a flow so that I can help you understand? I mean, I can probably say whether it's really possible or not.
Okay.
Can you
So
help
just a
me
situation.
understand a flow?
Yeah, of course. Let's say there's a feature or maybe a bug or maybe a issue. Three situations. And then a business analyst puts a feature in, or maybe let's start from there.
Hmm.
There are three situations. How should a business analyst put information in Azure?
Hmm. See, I'll give you an example of what I've done in the past with Data
Mhm.
Factory. Okay.
Mhm.
In Data Factory, what we did is Data Factory is basically your the end output of Data Factory is your BI, right? Your
Mhm.
analysis. So they used to build the pipeline in the Data Factory. So that pipeline, which we talk about it inside the Data Factory, is not the same as DevOps. It's the logical pipeline which you're building. You take the raw data from somewhere, maybe
Mm-hmm.
Snowflake, maybe somewhere, some data lake you're taking up, and building a logic and creating a BI. Now, what we did as a DevOps engineer is they did it on dev environment. We created a DevOps pipeline on top of it to
Can
deploy
you
it on
show?
the test, UAT, and the production.
Would you be able to show me that a little, like a quick glimpse of it?
I don't have the setup right now. And it's a client
The
setup which I can never show.
not a client,
So no, but I
demo.
don't have my own setup. It's,
Oh,
right, it's costly to run. But yes, this logical flow is possible. Our DevOps will come only once your dev environment is ready. You understand? Once your dev
yeah, yeah.
environment is ready, we will pick up the configuration files from the dev environment of Data Factory and then deploy that on the test environment of the Data Factory and then the pre-prod and then the prod.
Okay.
So it is all identical now.
So going back to almost like 45 minutes and an hour back, I did see that you were trying to create those files. It was not there. Maybe it's just the test site. That's why. Um, would it be possible to give us another, quick glimpse of how things work, how it gets created, including a business analyst part in that case, because business analyst is a major role in all these cases, right?
Hmm.
Because it's
I'll
come from
I'll
the
pick up some
analysis.
blogs for you where they have step by step, which might help
Mhm.
you to understand how things are configured. I'll pick up some blogs, DevOps blogs, and share it with you. I hope that will make sense.
Okay, and also if you could help us in couple of other things like an automation of reports that could be generated from Azure or maybe DevOps, wherein it's coming out as a
Hmm.
schedule every single day.
Oh, that's
Uh,
part of the Power BI actually. Hmm. I understand where you're coming.
so it's something that if we put in, and it should come automatically, wherein we do not have to run, or maybe the people who are already in it, they
Fair
should
enough.
get
Yeah.
those notification. Hey, these things are there.
Hmm.
You know.
Makes sense. But yeah, that's more of a Power BI, which is away from DevOps or DevSecOps. But I'll definitely try
But
to
that's
get
a
hold of
cycle,
some.
right?
Sorry.
That's a cycle of whole product.
Okay. Now, if you talk about the cycle, yeah, I'll definitely give you some information around that where you can understand the complete flow with possibly some blog examples, which you might understand better, right?
Okay,
Sounds good.
appreciate
Any
that.
other questions? Thank you.
Yeah. I'll hold on to that one again.
Sure, sure, Nikesh. Right. Any other questions, guys?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Anish. Basically, I just want to get more clarification on the containers concept you were talking about. Can you just elaborate about that? What are the containers basically meaning?
See, containers in a very simple terms, if I have to say, for example, why do you need a virtual machine? You have to install a software and you have to run an application, correct?
Yeah,
Now, what if I have 20 such applications to run and all the 20 needs its own environment, which means all the 20 needs its own virtual machine? What happens? You will end up creating 20 virtual machines. Yes or no? Now, the
yes,
containers are a concept where it is saying, hey, you don't have to create 20 such virtual machines. Okay. You create tiny containers, which is an encapsulated box, which can run on the same operating system. Okay. 20 such environments, which is using only 1/10 of the operating system's CPU and RAM, lesser than 1/10 or 1/20th. And the requirement of storage is also very, very low. And your application is peacefully running in an encapsulated place And you can run multiple such. Say, for example, in a EC2 instance, you can't run MySQL two versions, 5.8 and 5.9 simultaneously. Yes or no? What if,
Yeah.
as a developer, you want to test it? You can run inside the container. On a single laptop, you can run both inside containers. It'll still run like a charm. The container world was created precisely for development and testing, but today it has grown so much. People are enjoying it on the production line. As simple as that. Did I make any sense?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, it's a more kind of a providing a speedy process, and
Speedy, compact process, and making sure the developers doesn't have to rewrite the code every time when we deploy the code on a new type of EC2 instance. They write the code, they set the environment, they create a container around it and say, hey, just use this container everywhere.
okay, okay. So it's kind of a backup also thing.
Oh yeah, it is a lot of things. Today, it has become the default behavior of I mean, a default option for a customer to create any application.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hi Vishwa, this is Subiksha.
Yeah, hi,
So
Subiksha.
basically, we've seen the logs of the build, the logs which you use for the code build, right? So
Hmm,
it was giving the build logs. What is the
hmm.
exact difference between the build logs and the CloudWatch exactly? Because I think that
The
would be giving
build
more.
logs actually goes into the CloudWatch. CloudWatch is a placeholder.
Okay,
Okay, CloudWatch is the place where all the logs will come and sit. Build log is one of the logs which are coming in. There could be EC2 logs, ECS logs, EKS logs. Build, code build is one of the service in AWS which is pushing its logs into CloudWatch.
okay, thank you. But one more question.
Yep.
If an EC2 instance is, attached to an auto scaling group,
Mm,
and that EC2 instance has a static IP. So if one of the instance is going down, the next
mm.
instance which is coming up, will it take the same IP? Because one
You
instance is
could
already
make
running.
it, you could make it. There is an option called as launch template. For
Mm-hmm.
example, you can also hardcode the private IP only. Okay, usually private IPs. Okay, you can
Okay.
hardcode the private IPs only if that. Now the problem is if you're using that launch template every time, there'll be an IP conflict. So you will have to carefully design that and use it very wisely. Okay, but there is an option to do to get back the same IP address always.
But that launch template you're telling about the cloud formation, right? That would be used only for the private. But if the static IP is used for the instance, how exactly will I be getting that same IP? We
No,
faced
you
an issue
in
also.
auto scaling group, you will not be able to control that without the launch template. You can't control the
Okay.
static IPs. It will be dynamic. Okay, now there is another option where by default you have something called as DHCP option set. That's a default DHCP
Mm-hmm.
option set. Now you could
Yeah.
divert that to your own DHCP server and
Okay.
map the MAC addresses.
Okay.
You understand? Map the
Yeah.
MAC addresses of your network interface card to make
Okay.
sure it gets always the same IP. That's a little
Okay.
tricky configuration. It it really needs babysitting there, but
Mhm.
it is doable,
Okay, thank you. That clears the
right?
question. Thank you.
Right. Questions? We are almost running out of time. I'll take up the last question before we can end the session. Questions?
Um, Quick thing. I
Yeah.
was just trying to check again, Nikesh. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
Nagesh. Yeah.
going back to BA thing. So if we are using DevOps, I think there's already an option of BI option, right?
On the
Power
code
BI.
pipeline you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, Power BI,
Yes, the Power
wherein the
BI, which is there
APIs.
in the Azure. Yes.
Hmm. And then we can automate a couple of things. This is one of
Yes.
my who just texted me. There's an option wherein we can do it. That's a little
Yes,
bit of.
Power BI with the Azure pipeline,
Mhm.
you can do a bit of an automation there of what you want. So, uh, say for example, with some bit of a changes in the code, you want the UI to change and apply it for the production. You can do that with the Azure pipeline.
I'm more looking for of an automation of the reports as well as what's getting in, what's getting out, what's got done,
Mm,
the status technically,
right.
and those things I'm looking for because that makes the stakeholders on the you know on the top of the notch.
Fair enough. I'll see what I can do based on that.
Yeah, because that's the major part of the whole business. Why? Because everything is coming from the analysis and the requirement.
Agree. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, the first step is that, and then comes the whole process of what you just demonstrated.
Sure.
Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the next call, if we have to do it, I think everyone over here would be involved. And then let's look at the next step of these things, how the workflow is in terms of how we can automate, how we can get things, who can get those information as an
Mm,
automation. It's not a query that we need to build because we are trying to get off from that manual process.
mm,
We already had the automation in our internal process, but then
right.
moving on to this amazing product. So I think automation is something that we would love to have once again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I get the point.
You get my point, right?
Yeah. Sure. We'll try to work out something. I'm not sure about the timeline. We'll
That's fine.
see what we can do around something that, and all we can have a session.
Okay.
We'll come
And
back to you on that.
that also goes for the development part, testing part, as well
Mm,
as how things are going because even they need those things. They don't want to
right.
run those as manual stuff. I think these guys are doing it right now. It's a lot
Mm,
of effort apart from what they're doing right now.
okay. Sure.
Okay. I
All
would
right
love
there.
to see the next ones.
I understand. I can see that excitement there. But yeah, we'll come back on that.
Thank you.
Cool. No more questions, I guess. Nice. It was. I enjoyed the session. I hope you guys also enjoyed the session.
Oh
Um,
yes.
right. Great. See you guys soon in the next session. If at all anything coming up.
Sure.
And
Thank you.
take care, everyone.
Thank
Holding
you.
on to
Bye.
my horses,
Yeah, I know.
Vishwa.
I can feel it. Yeah, sure, Nikesh.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Take care.
See you
Take
soon.
care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.